we're moving from quantum computing to something that I think's in the newspapers even more often than quantum computing, if that's possible, which is artificial intelligence. Just to introduce myself, I'm the Scientia Professor of Artificial Intelligence here at UNSW. And we've got a fantastic panel who I'd like to invite onto the stage. Pascale Fung, who is a leading AI researcher in areas like natural language processing. She's currently the director of the Center for AI Research at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. She advises lots of governments. She consults for the World Economic Forum. We also have Kuansan Wang, who, again, is originally an AI researcher in speech technology. He's worked at a number of places like Bell Labs and is now at Microsoft, where he is currently managing director in their academic outreach program. The panel's been very carefully selected because we contain a diversity of views. We cover industry and academia, and we span the globe. So we have Pascale, who can perhaps help us understand some of the Asian perspective and some of the Chinese thoughts in this space. Kuansan, who can help us understand the US, North America, which of course major AI powers that are in this AI race that I'm sure we'll be talking about. And myself, well, I'm batting for the rest of the world. I'm obviously, by my accent, born in Britain, a long-term Europhile, but now have been in Australia for the last 15 years. So I'm going to be trying to represent the rest of the world. Do please use your apps as we get towards the second half of the conversation. We'll start to take your questions and start to try and answer the things that concern you. But let me join you over here and start by saying, well, we do get AI so much in the newspapers these days. What's your most favorite misconception that people have about AI that we should be trying to correct and inform people? Pascale, you start.
I think the most famous misconception might be that AI is about to take over us and kill us all anytime soon, that it's an existential threat to us all. We're far away from having all-powerful AI technologies, and there's absolutely no intention of any researchers working towards malicious AI to kill us all. And there is no such thing as power does not always equate to intent of powering over others. And that is a very human trait.
It's a very male view to think that power is going to mean we're going to take over.
Yeah, that is actually a very human view of other humans. And technology is not the same as our human values. So that is a misconception. We can talk about that endlessly.
Great. So we've already got rid of the second half of the title. Yeah. AI is our biggest existential threat. So we've only got the road to hell is paved with good intentions left now.
That's exactly the question I asked Toby, who came up with this title. AI is the biggest the threat to humanity. So I fully agree with what Pascale has said. The other misconception I would like to point out is under the implication of this title is AI is somehow new. It's more disrupting than any other technology development that we have seen in the history. In fact, the AI technologies or applications that we are seeing today can all date it back to the research that we have been developing in university back in 80s. So many of you probably heard about this wave of AI applications powered by deep learning. Deep learning actually was developed in the 1980s, in the mid-80s, including the convolutional neural network, so on as reinforcement learning that made the AlphaGo beats human. They are all back in the 80s and 90s, and it benefits tremendously from the continuous investment that the government and other research institutions have put into the universities to carry out the fundamental research. Probably many of you have heard about AI winters. So AI has peaked and going through cycles. The first wave of AI the AI excitement was actually in the 60s, and then it went down. That gave us the first AI winter. And then in mid-80s, it was hot again, only to see that the temperature went down in the 90s. And recently, the AI is coming to our real world. And the way I see it, as I pointed out, the technology, the research, actually is not that new. So what is new? What we are seeing about this wave of AI is unprecedented amount of data that we can use to train the AI model, and the consequent, the demand of the processing the big amount of data actually leads to the development of so-called cloud computing, the enormous amount of computing resources that we are able to harness to make the models better trained, better extract the traits and features in the data sets. So in a sense, there's nothing new under the sun, that's still true, but there are also a lot of technological and progresses that, in a sense, there's not very different from all the technology, the development from industrial revolutions and on.
So are you not worried that we might have another AI winter? I mean, we must be at the peak of the Gartner hype circle, and that, you know, presumably we're not going to meet everyone's expectations. Does that not worry you?
Well, there was a paper from MIT Technical Review last week or 2 weeks ago. The title is that we have read more than 16,000 papers, and we think that deep learning is hitting a wall. We don't know. Actually, from my perspective, we are developing AI technologies. There are just tremendous amount of space we can explore. And Pascale is also working on a conversational AI system, and I believe the landscape there is also left a lot room for exploration, right?
I think so. I think the difference between AI, the market for AI today, compared to the 90s or 80s, I started working in the areas in 1988. So I've seen the cycles. I think the huge difference between today and then is that we have seen a lot of real-world applications. The market is actually demanding systems that can talk to us and help us find information. Therapists help, doctors are asking for help, and the financial industry is a very early adopter of this technology, and so on and so forth. So we actually see a very strong pull from the market today, as compared to in the last few decades where the R&D was fundamentally mostly funded by defense industry. In the US, I was a PhD student then in the United States, and almost everything we did at the time, I think you remember also, right. Bell Labs, and they were funded by the defense industry, and then very few commercial companies were funding this type of research. So today, we're actually seeing the pull. And also, I've seen the difference in terms of the cycle between upstream research to application that has been shortened considerably. I still remember in the 90s, the commercial systems of conversational AI systems were deploying technology that was developed 10 years prior to that. So the timeline between research and commercialization was probably 10 to 15 years. Today, we have seen this cycle completely compressed into perhaps a few months, even inverse, in the sense that we have seen a lot of requests from applications, from companies asking for technologies we have not thought about developing, and we have to adapt our research direction to a lot of these real-world applications. And also there are lots of interdisciplinary research. AI winter hit when there was not much funding and not much application in the last few decades. Now, there's a lot of application, not just in conversational systems, but also in terms of medical applications and financial applications and in service industry and so on and so forth. So people are asking for this kind of technology, and we are being pulled to collaborate with life scientists and business school and social scientists, so on and so forth. So it's no longer, AI research is no longer a narrow field research. It is really embedded within a lot of fields. So I think this time really is different because AI has become more like an infrastructure technology. more like the internet and the wireless communication networks. So because of this, I don't think there will be a similar kind of AI winter coming. Will there be adjustment of expectations? Sure, there will be. There is already. People already see that what AI can do and cannot do. And we're here to talk about that as well. So I think there's a huge application potential for AI. There are a lot of things we haven't done, and there's a potential for more research and development. And there's also more need for interdisciplinary research and development, as well as collaboration between academia and the industry, as well as government and the security and the defense industry.
So great promise in areas like medicine and finance and so on. But you pointed out, of course, that there's huge, great challenges still to tackle. So what do you see as the biggest scientific obstacles before we can actually really solve the dream that all of you and I had when we started out, all three of us, I'm sure, started out, which was to build machines that could match the broad capabilities of the human brain?
So there are a lot of grand challenges in AI, ranging from scientific engineering to ethical challenges and governance challenges. So if I want to focus on scientific challenge, the most obvious thing we're facing today is the big data. As you mentioned, the AI technology today is making a lot of gain based on a large amount of data available to us. But it is really just available to very few big commercial companies. All right, universities today cannot compete against the Facebooks, the Googles, and Microsoft, and the Baidus of the world because we don't have access to that huge amount of data. And the companies are not releasing those data because, well, they say it's because of privacy issues, but you know.
Well, Facebook is trying to be more private. It needs to be.
Exactly. So we're actually facing the challenge of not having equal access to the raw material for our research, which is data. And then in addition, because this center of innovation in AI is sort of constrained by the accessibility to big data, so you see these big labs growing ever bigger. Right? The top internet companies in the world, especially in the US and China, they grow bigger and bigger, and they become the center of attraction for talents as well. So we see this kind of like AI-rich centers of innovation get richer, and then universities are having to compete with these industries to get more talent. We have no problem getting students today because they all want to come into AI, don't they? But we have to compete to get professors. We don't have enough AI professors. We don't have enough AI researchers in the universities. They're all in the industry labs. So that's a big challenge.
And
because of that,
don't you have to fight to keep the students once they've got some understanding of AI, that they don't get taken?
I would say that's a lost battle. I don't think we fight to keep them, but we fight for them to actually at least start their own companies rather than all going to the same big companies. Now. So the scientific challenge, because of this, I talk back to the scientific challenges. One is that we don't have access to big data. Many research groups don't have access to big data. Second is that, therefore, it is very, very important that we focus on research on the future technologies that are based on low resource. I have been working on low resource speech recognition and low resource natural language processing for 20 years. And there are other researchers working on how we can use different types of machine learning that does not rely on homogeneous huge amount of data. So that is a big challenge in AI and in machine learning as well, which is how do we enable machines to learn from multiple modes of data, not just speech, but also visual and so on and so forth, like humans. How do we enable machines to learn continuously, right? How do we enable machines to learn from what we call zero-shot learning or low-resource learning that does not require access to a humongous amount of big data? So that is one very important, one of the biggest scientific challenges we face today in terms of learning, in terms of machine learning in AI.
And of course, that's exactly right. We at Microsoft Research, we like to, especially my job as a Managing Director of Outreach. My job is to interact with academia, our colleagues in academia, to make sure that the future talents we are going to recruit, which are the students you are educating, can actually have adequate technology and the know-how to come into work in the industrial research lab like Microsoft Research. And exactly 10 years ago, we start seeing there is this gap of access. 10 years ago, it was even worse, not only to access to data, but also access to big iron machine of computing resources to churn through the data. And so we tried, as Pascale alluded, it's not very straightforward just to share data with academic because they are actually not scientific obstacles. They are legal and all sorts of regulatory obstacles. Pascale alluded to the privacy, and I would like to add another one that is copyright. So for example, if we wanted to share all the web crawls with universities, we will run into all sorts of legal jeopardy from copyright owners to share that big data sets. And so over the years, Microsoft Research has been attempted several remedies, like we enlarge our internship program, or we strengthen our collaboration with universities, but they're still not as running as smoothly as we want. And so we actually took time. It actually takes us a few years to identify, is there any big data sets that we can share with the academia, our academic colleagues, so they can actually start using it as a teaching and research resources in their classroom, in their research project. And it actually takes us 4 years, finally, to identify one data set that we think we can safely, our lawyers think, that we can safely share. And that's what the academic graph, Microsoft Academic Graph. And so what it is we find a field that actually not only doesn't have privacy problem, but has an opposite of a privacy problem. And that's actually scholarly communications. So think about every one of you, if you have ever write a paper, you probably want as many people to know it as possible, right? So that is actually the opposite of a privacy problem. We said that that's actually a good area that we can share with the community. And so we launched some efforts to extract all the scholarly communication material that we can find from the internet. And surprisingly, on the internet, you can actually find more than 200 years of academic publications out there. And we actually curated data set using machine reading, and we are making that available. So this morning, we heard about the academic ranking. They are using like 15 million papers over the 5 years. For the past 200 years, we actually have more than 200 million research articles out there. We observe more than 200 million authors. These are really, really huge number. And so the graph is, as of today, is growing rapidly, exponentially. I believe yesterday a speaker mentioned that the graph is growing exponentially, which is true, and it has been true for the past 200 years. So
not a lot of people realize science is an exponential process.
That's right.
More scientists are alive today than
right.
have ever lived,
And
anyone who knows any maths knows that that's
totally
the hallmark
right.
of an exponential process.
That's right, and the compound growth rate is close to 9%. I mean, my mortgage, if I have money with deposit bank, I don't know who is giving me 9% of interest rate, but we are actually producing.
Yeah, it's hard to think of anything that's growing at a compound rate of 9%, although that does worry you about the sustainability of being able to fund science at 9% growth rate.
The amazing thing is we are actually sustained for more than 2 centuries with only 2 exceptions in our history. If you plot the number of publications over time, you see it's growing exponentially with the exception from 1914 to 1918. That's World War I. Another dip that we saw is from 1939, right on the clock, 1939 to 1945. What happened there? World War II. And the place that we see the flag growth is in the 1930s. We think that has something to do with Great Depression. But the rest of the history, it's actually growing. And after 1998, the compound rate actually ticks up again.
Great. Well, I applaud Microsoft research, although I do find it ironic the one data that you can share with academics is data about academics.
Of course.
But to go to I mean, one of the issues you raised was about professors and so on. Do vice chancellors, universities have to be more innovative in terms of, for example, partnerships where people, academics can step backwards and forwards between industry and university and the sorts of relationships that they have and the freedom that academics can to move backwards and forwards?
I can only speak for my area for AI. I think it is imperative today. I mentioned that we don't have enough professors as it is, and we don't have enough industry leaders to lead these industrial labs and even startups and so on and so forth. In the US, it's already the case where the leading professors are all part-time in industry, right? And sometimes seconded, sometimes part-time. And
is that happening in China as well?
In China, no. Mainland China?
Yeah.
No.
China, yes.
China? Mainland China.
Well,
the professors full-time being in the university, they're not full-time in the university.
They have their startups.
No, that's different. So I'm talking about you retaining your own position in the university. So you still continue to supervise students. Because if you lose the professors to the industry or their own startups, then you lose these labs. You lose people who can train the next generation of students. So you don't want to lose that in the universities. So the model in the US, a lot of universities, that they allow professors to join research labs in the industry while retaining a quasi-full-time position in the university. They continue to train PhD students, which is very important, and have their own research groups and access to research funding. So this model had never been done before until recent years in our field. And I have not seen that happening in Asia. I think one challenge might be the public perception. And another challenge in Hong Kong, at least, is because our universities are public funded. So it is difficult to justify a public funded professor position and allow that professor to also be full-time in the industry. So some kind of innovation has to happen there. At the level of the administration, at the level of the government, because public funded institutions, it is difficult to do that. In China and in Hong Kong, the reality is that most universities are public funded. We don't have a lot of private universities like the Ivy Leagues and so on, so we don't have any actually, especially top universities are all public funded. So that's a challenge we're facing. I don't know about in Australia, how you face that challenge or how you resolve that. So some kind of innovative thinking needs to happen at the administrative level.
That's exactly right. One of the collaborations that Microsoft Research has with universities, one of the issues that we always have to pay a lot of attention to is intellectual property right assertion. Universities, believe it or not, are getting more and more aggressive in asserting intellectual property rights. So even they have students coming to Microsoft Research or faculty. Sometimes the work coming out of there, if we are not careful, the university would want to have a claim on the intellectual property, and that creates lots of complications. And so that's...
You're saying that's a bad thing?
That's certainly not helpful.
Not helpful.
I don't know why though. I mean, why should it be like the companies own all the IP rights when the students are trained by us and they go there for a summer based on the knowledge they learn from us, right? I think we should all think more out of the box in the sense of collaboration. So I have students who recently, so I was a PhD student when I was at Bell Labs. And that's a very common model for people to go work for research labs. And I think Bell Labs at the time were a lot more relaxed about these kind of rights compared to today's companies such as Microsoft or Google.
At that time, in the 90s, MIT was not as aggressive in asserting
Yes.
IP patents on the joint projects.
Yeah, and sadly, Bell
So
Labs.
the flexibility needs to come from both sides, from
That's
the
right.
companies and from the universities. I feel that, so recent years, I have seen a shift. Like this summer, this past semester, I had a student who went to a company in Silicon Valley, maybe I shouldn't name it, and to my surprise, they offered to collaborate. And we actually, the student worked on his thesis topic together, just like what I did at Bell Labs. And we published together, in collaboration with this company. So we did this at Bell Labs before, 20 years ago, right? And I see this being done again in these new AI companies. So this we have to figure out. There
Right.
needs to be flexibility from both sides.
Right.
We should not be fighting for the IP rights, because IP rights, what do they mean, right? They're useless unless you make something out of it. All right, you don't make something out of it. It's just kind of a malicious kind of a competition where you use that as a defense mechanism to sue other companies. Then that is really bad for any technology development. So it should be seen as some kind of seed to future innovations, right? If we are in the process, if we are in the role of seeding innovation, then we will look at it very differently. We can seed it together. We can actually allow students to do their startups based on this, and maybe the companies can have a stake in that. But we need to look at it differently.
I'm a fan of the University of California at Berkeley's sort of attitude, which is to make sure that the people behind the technology have the incentive, have the IP, because
Right.
they will generate, you want to have,
Right.
rather than try and get small percentage of nothing, let those people get, and they've found in hindsight that they get far more in return in philanthropy than they would ever done if they tried to hold on to the IP themselves, and no one would be incentivized to develop it.
Right.
Totally.
Absolutely.
So to move on to some of the concerns that people have, I mean, one of the concerns that people have is the impact that all of this technology is going to have, AI in particular, is going to have on the future of work. What's your take on, are all the jobs going to be just taken over by robots?
I guess World Economic Forum published a report on which jobs will be taken over by AI, and I was very happy to see that one of the jobs that will not be taken over by AI is professors. I don't know who did that research, economists surely, but I wouldn't worry too much about it, because the nature of work has changed, evolved over centuries, and it was always disrupted by disrupting technologies from the first to the third industrial revolution. And so the nature of work will change. It is already changing. Actually, people have seen the nature of work change in the last 20 years by the internet, right? So by smartphone technology, I always like to quote, to use the example of app developers. There are millions of app developers today who did not have that job before 2007, before smartphones became prevalent. So there will be new jobs being created, and it's going to happen organically and evolve as an evolution rather than as a revolution. So the key for universities is to actually have that vision of the future and to start and to continue educating our students and prepare them for the future. But that is a big question, though. So how can we better prepare our students for the future of jobs? And so my view is that jobs will evolve, but AI is not going to take over our jobs.
So to answer, I think you put your finger on the really important question, which is, how do institutions like universities change? How does their mission change? What do we need to educate people for the future? Because clearly these new jobs will require different skills to the old jobs. So what are the new skills? What is how should the mission of universities change?
So before I talk about universities, I'm also a parent of children who are in middle school and primary school. And what I've seen what those schools have done, one thing they have done that worries me a lot and worries a lot of parents of tech background, is that they are very eager to teach children the latest and the trendiest programming language without teaching them the fundamentals. And a lot of universities also changed their computer science curriculum to teach the most trendy programming languages, and then taking out things like compilers and theories. And that worries me because, sure, we need to train students to, in order for them to be able to take the latest jobs and fill the gaps in the latest jobs. But university job really is to prepare students to be adaptive and to be able to take any jobs in the future in the society. So with that in view, I feel our curriculum really should focus more on interdisciplinary education, on preparing our students in the fundamentals. What are the fundamentals? Of course, mathematics, sciences, and the theory. And of course, also in terms of ethical principles, philosophy, humanities. I think humanity education is more important than ever. Our students need to be able to communicate, need to be able to think logically, scientific thinking, and critical thinking. So to prepare people with critical thinking and critical minds is what we should look at as a university to do. And with that in mind, then we should look at our curriculum, how we should teach them. So which programming language sort of becomes secondary? To me, it's really trivial because any good student, computer science student, can learn any programming language on their own, right? Actually, I had my graduate student taught me PyTorch last year.
PyTorch.
Right? I don't need to have a class to teach PyTorch because it will be replaced. Every year there's a new programming language coming out in AI, right? So that is not the point. The point is the fundamentals, the ability to learn, the ability to think critically. That's what we need to teach our students. So that's a much bigger topic than what programming language and what kind of latest equipment to have in the classrooms and so on and so forth.
No, I always like to point out to people the dirty secret is that machine learning is actually getting computers to program themselves.
Right.
And increasingly, no one on the planet knows how to write a program to recognize a stop sign. But we know how to write a machine learning program that can learn how to do that program.
So that's actually a good way to consider this problem. What kind of jobs that would be replaced by AI? And this morning, I think Nicholas Fritz talked about we as a species have undergone two revolutions. One is the cognitive revolution that basically prompted us from the middle of the food chain to the top of the food chain. And this is also happening as we speak now. What we can see is AI is quickly approaching or exceeding the cognitive capability the human can have. And this sounds like a very serious, a serious assertion. But if you just think about it, what cognition needs, the cognitive psychologists taught us that 5 necessary elements for cognition. One is to do logic and statistical computation. The second one, good memory. You cannot forget what you have learned. The third one is endurance, the attention. You have to be able to focus on the subject matter, and actually attention deficit syndrome is an obstacle to learning. The fourth is endurance. If you can remain attentive, but only a short period of time, it's not going to help you. And if you look at all these qualities, in terms of computation, either logical or numerical, memory, endurance, and attention. These are all the qualities that we can make a machine better than human today.
But it sounds like to me these are qualities to be a super slave.
To be a
master, a person needs to be able to have critical thinking and creative thinking.
Exactly. And so that's why I really like what Danny talked about yesterday. Perspiration without inspiration. Machine can do a lot of the memorization, can do a lot of knowledge gathering for us today. What we need in the next generation of teaching to prepare our workforce is probably in the inspiration part. How do we actually think? So Pascale talked about the humanity and arts. We now have AI mimicking, try to play Bach, and it actually fools humans in terms of creation. And we now have AI creating Monet that actually the regular people like myself could not tell which one is generated by AI or which one is real masterpiece. So in terms of arts, we are already seeing that this AI as technology is just like Pascale said, is seamlessly integrated, interwoven into the fabric of our lives. And so it brings us to think what it is that we as human different from machine, and that's all sorts of
so machine art.
So much to think about.
I'm
yes.
happy you brought that up because I also I'm a visiting faculty at the Existential Academy of Fine Art in China, and we work with artists. So machine art today is amazing, especially to lay people. It basically uses machine learning to synthesize the geniuses of the planet, past and present. Still, it's kind of a perspiration because it looks at a lot of pictures and learns the style. And what it's doing is takes some content and does some kind of style transformation. Of course, it can also do synthesis, meaning it can synthesize an image that seemingly coming from nothing. But what it cannot do is that there's not a single machine artist, either in the realm of visual art or in music. There's also machine musician that can compose an entire piece that sounds very good and sounds like a Chopin or something. But there's not a single musician, or computer musician, or computer artwork that has revolutionized. What is a creative artist? What is a revolutionary artist? It's somebody who came up with a style that nobody has seen before, and yet it inspires awe in people. It has to inspire awe. So machines today do not inspire awe in terms of art. Machines inspire awe in terms of playing Go and all that. But what I'm talking about is that humans and machines work in symbiosis. I think in the future, the nature of job would also go that way. So machines become better and better slaves to humans. But humans need to basically, we will continue to innovate in the ways that machines cannot. We don't just synthesize. Human innovation and human creative process is a great mystery to us. Nobody knows how we come up with ideas. We come up with, so one thing that my group has been working on is conversational humor, which is to enable machines to learn how to be humorous. Now, humor is a very elusive kind of emotion in human beings. We know it when we see it. We laugh. In every culture, there's a sense of humor. But what is it, right? Can machines actually generate? Machines can be taught to generate jokes, like template-based jokes, but to have a sense of humor. So there are a lot of elements like this in human intelligence that we actually have no understanding about. We just know we have it. We don't know how we have it, and certainly machines are not learning how to synthesize that yet.
But, I mean, even if they do, I mean, you talk there about the peaks, and I agree that the machines are way beneath the peaks of the creativity. But even if we look at more mundane art, I think there's a more fundamental level, which is that the stories behind them are not ones that speak to us. They're not going to speak about love and loss and death because they're machines. They don't have any of those feelings. And so, even if they can at the surface level make things that look like bits of art, more mundane art, they won't speak to us because they're not speaking to the human experience.
They won't make us cry.
Yes, they won't make us cry. We won't hopefully fall in love with them. Let's move on. We talked a little about jobs. And a theme that was, a topic that was mentioned in the last panel, which one I think is actually really important for this field, is diversity. We actually seem to be going backwards now in terms of diversity. If you look at some of the metrics, some of the participation of women and other minority communities in the area. Why is that, and what can we do to fix it?
Do you want to take a...
Diversity.
What can Microsoft do to help us fix this problem?
To some extent, the AI, the over machine learning, more specifically, is a reflection of us. So a big chunk of machine learning is still so-called supervised learning. It actually feeds on the data sets we provide. We provide it with the machine learning system to infer And so to learn things. So we all heard about the mischief that some of the machine learning would actually classify certain ethnic group as less attractive than other, or the famous debacle that recognized human being as apes, or Microsoft have own example that we put a conversational system out there, and it quickly learned all sorts of racist comments or out-of-the-top comments from the internet. And so in a sense, it's not machine, it's us. And so probably a way to look at it is by looking at a machine, it gives us reflections of what happened to us, either in terms of a diversity or inclusion. We are, in Microsoft, we are very supportive. We are actually quite gung-ho into make sure that diversity and inclusion is woven into every aspect of our technology expectation and even talent recruitments. But I don't think this is actually a machine learning or AI problem. It's us, a human problem.
Pascale, I mean, you've risen to the top of the field. What can you share? How would it have been easier?
Yeah,
how can we make it better?
It's very interesting because, you know, I came from a field which was not called AI before. You know, in speech and language, it's just called, you know, speech processing and language processing. And there were other conferences on AI, right? So what I've seen the last 30 years in my field of natural language, I just choose the field of natural language processing. When I came into this field, I was an engineer. Before then, natural language processing had a lot of linguists in the field. And it was actually more diverse in terms of people's backgrounds. There were linguists, psychologists, and then the engineers came. Unfortunately, once we came in, we sort of squeeze out other people with other backgrounds. There are more and more engineers. And now, 20 years ago, when I first came into the field, doing natural language processing based on big data was a big deal because we got yelled at for doing that. They say, you know, you're not doing real AI, that's just engineering.
That's just statistics.
It was just statistics. And we said,
Statistics
okay,
and
it's
logic.
just statistics. There was no logic, it was just statistics, fine. So now today, the main approach, the mainstream approach in natural language processing is statistical learning. In particular today, as of now, is predominantly one form or another of deep learning. Now, this becomes very accessible to engineers. The field has, because it's based so much on machine learning and so much on statistical processing, it's actually very, very favorable to engineers. And as a field, it becomes a field where you don't really have to know much about language. You don't even have to have any interest in language. You can speak just one language, and you can work on machine translation. Because there's data. You don't yourself have to have any insight on languages to be able to work on this. You just have to take data, and you can just focus on the algorithmic, the intricacy of the neural networks. And so this approach, because it's kind of not diverse approach. So we are getting more and more people of not very diverse backgrounds. Now,
So that's the problem. How are we going to fix it?
to fix that, so I see actually a big opportunity in terms of AI. Why? Because today, if you look at AI applications, there are so many applications in different areas, in financial domain, in health, and just take the example of health, for example. There are a lot of applications in terms of disease control, disease prevention, diagnosis, and all that. Now, we see collaboration between engineers and the life scientists, right? Now, for the next generation of students, I already see students who are interested in these applications coming into learning, machine learning, right? Now, people with more interest in language, they're coming into engineering. People who have interest in life science, they come into engineering. This is actually a big opportunity for us to attract more people with different backgrounds, in particular women, into engineering, into AI, via AI. So there are more girls, young girls today, they're more interested in AI. They were not interested in AI. They were not interested in machine learning before. They are interested today because they see the applications. So I see this as a huge opportunity. Maybe sometime down the line, in 10 years, 20 years, we'll see more diversity in AI, in engineering, because of the application, and because AI is important and useful in all areas. So we're actually getting more. So in my lab, I see all these young girls coming in from secondary schools wanting to do internships in the summer with us. I had never seen that before from girls.
I think that's why it's wonderful that there's this burgeoning area of AI,
Right.
AI for social good.
Right,
Because
indeed.
that's the sort of area
Indeed.
that will lure these people in,
Right.
that they realize that they can do good things for the planet.
And doing something for social good appeals a lot to young girls for some reason. They want to do something for other people. This has been, it's not me who said this, it's research has shown that more girls are interested in the impact they can have in the society. That's why they traditionally will go into the medicine, for example. Medical school has attracted more girls than boys in the last few decades already. So AI for social good or science for social good, research for social good is a message that we can use to appeal for girls to come into STEM in general.
Great. Well, I think that is a wonderful positive note to end on. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to get to your questions, but join me in thanking my panelists for some really stimulating conversation.